The orbital citadel of Thesara did not spin for gravity the way human stations did. It generated it through layered gravitic plates that hummed faintly underfoot, like a distant animal breathing in its sleep. Cameron always noticed that hum. It reminded him to keep his balance, physically and otherwise. He stood among diplomats, aides, and ceremonial guards whose armor curved like liquid metal, pretending to be exactly what his badge said he was. A merchant representative with a talent for numbers and a complete inability to understand the private language currently being spoken 3 meters away. The Thessarans looked almost human if you did not stare too long. Smooth skin, expressive eyes, familiar proportions. Then you noticed the ears, long, elegantly tapered, moving slightly as they listened, betraying emotions their faces carefully concealed. Cameron had once read that the ears were considered impolite to stare at. He stared at the ceiling instead and counted the microfractures in the crystal panels, a hobby he had developed during negotiations that moved at the speed of tectonic plates with stage fright. Queen Thesara sat elevated on a dais grown from the station itself, the material subtly responding to her presence. Power here was architectural. She listened while human envoys spoke in carefully translated trade language, every sentence filtered through layers of protocol and delay. Cameron smiled at the right moments. He nodded when nodding was expected. Internally, he was translating something else entirely. Another offer, another attempt to sound reasonable while asking for too much, one advisor murmured in Thessaran, voice pitched just low enough to be intimate. They always bring that one, another replied, the quiet one with the eyes like he's doing arithmetic. Cameron almost choked. He did not, because he had spent years training his face not to react. Arithmetic eyes. He would have taken that as a compliment on a better day. The Thessaran language flowed like layered music, meaning carried not only by words but by harmonics, micropauses, subtle shifts in resonance that humans were never supposed to perceive, let alone reproduce. Cameron heard it all. He had heard it since the first hour of negotiations, since the Queen had sighed in mild irritation and remarked that humans always underestimated silence. He had laughed internally at that one, because silence was exactly how he survived. The negotiations dragged. Offers were made. Counter-offers were delayed for cultural reflection, which Cameron had learned meant someone needed time to compose a dignified refusal. He passed the time cataloging the unguarded comments drifting through the room. It was like reading notes scribbled in the margins of a contract, except the margins were alive and very confident he was illiterate. Finally, Queen Thesara lifted a hand. The room stilled with mechanical precision. "Summon the translator," she said in Thessaran, tone flat with boredom. "I am tiring of speaking through ghosts." Cameron answered before the thought could stop him. "There will be a delay," he said, in perfect Thessaran cadence. "Your translator is still arguing with station security about ceremonial clearance." The hum beneath their feet seemed to hiccup. Thesara's eyes moved to him slowly, as if they needed to verify that reality was still assembled correctly. The ears, those carefully controlled indicators of emotion, froze mid-adjustment. For a moment no one spoke, which was impressive given the number of species present. "That," Thesara said, still in Thessaran, "was not addressed to you." Cameron inclined his head. "I know." Silence returned, denser this time. He felt every gaze turn, human and alien alike. A human aide dropped a data slate with a clatter that sounded unreasonably loud. "You speak my language," the Queen said. "Yes." "You understand it?" "Yes." "And you chose," she continued, "not to mention this." Cameron considered lying. He decided against it. "I have a long-standing policy of not volunteering information that could get me executed." Someone laughed. It might have been one of the Thessaran guards. It might have been Cameron's imagination, desperately trying to survive the moment. The Queen studied him, not with anger but with something far more dangerous. Interest. "Humans cannot produce Thessaran tonal structures," she said. "Your vocal anatomy does not allow it." "Mine didn't," Cameron replied. "I had it revised." That earned murmurs, sharper now, threaded with alarm. Cameron raised his hand slightly, a human gesture he hoped translated as non-threatening rather than confession. "Industrial accident," he added. "Freighter bay. Gravity shear. Lost most of my original larynx." The replacement is creative. Illegal? One advisor snapped. On at least 3 worlds, Cameron agreed. Possibly more. I stopped counting. Thassara leaned back, the dais subtly reshaping to support her posture. How long? She asked carefully. Have you understood our private discourse? Cameron winced. Since breakfast. That finally broke something. A ripple of reactions moved through the court. Outrage, disbelief, a few expressions that looked suspiciously like embarrassment. Cameron cleared his throat, acutely aware of the irony. For what it's worth, he said, the comments about human fashion were unfair. Our shoes are very practical. The Queen stared at him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. You are either the most dangerous man in this chamber, she said, or the most useful. Cameron exhaled, slow and careful. I've been both before, he said. Neither comes with dental. No one escorted Cameron out of the chamber immediately, which he decided was either an encouraging sign or a deeply ceremonial delay before something unpleasant. The Thessaran guards shifted positions with synchronized grace, their armor whispering softly as internal servos adjusted. He noted with detached curiosity that none of their weapons were pointed at him yet. That yet did a lot of work in his thoughts. Queen Thassara dismissed the rest of the delegation with a gesture that felt less like an order and more like gravity changing its mind. Humans were ushered out first, confused and whispering. Cameron caught one horrified look from a fellow merchant that clearly said, "You speak alien now?" As if it were a contagious condition. The doors sealed behind them, leaving Cameron alone with the Queen, her advisors, and an air so charged it made his reconstructed throat itch. You will explain? Thassara said, slowly. Cameron nodded. I prefer slowly. Fast explanations tend to end with screaming. One advisor bristled. You admit to espionage. I admit to listening, Cameron corrected. Espionage usually involves intent. I mostly wanted to know when someone was insulting my posture. That earned him a sharp look, and from another advisor, a stifled huff that might have been laughter. Thassara noticed. Her ears twitched once, a small, involuntary betrayal. Begin, she said. Cameron took a breath and felt the familiar resonance settle into place. His voice, tuned through years of practice, aligned with the Thessaran tonal spectrum as naturally as breathing. He explained the accident, the months in medical suspension, while experimental surgeons debated whether rebuilding a human voice with alien-derived musculature was brilliant or catastrophically stupid. He explained the data he had studied while learning to speak again, the fascination that turned into obsession, the quiet nights practicing harmonics until the walls vibrated just enough to annoy his neighbors. I never intended to use it publicly, he said. Knowing Thessaran was like knowing how to pick a lock on a door you pass every day. You don't do it unless you absolutely have to, or unless the door asks you a question. That is not a human idiom, Thessara said. I've been expanding my collection. She rose and descended from the dais, the station responding subtly, clearing space for her movement. Up close, the resemblance to humanity was uncanny. Only the ears, long and expressive, reminded Cameron he was standing before someone shaped by a different evolutionary argument. You understand, she said, circling him slowly, that my people believe your existence should be impossible. Yes, Cameron said. I've been told that my whole life, usually by doctors. And yet here you stand. Technically, he said, I'm standing on several trillion tons of advanced engineering. That helps. One advisor spoke sharply. He heard state-sensitive dialogue. He also heard jokes, Cameron said. Some of them were very good. The one about human negotiators aging visibly during pauses. I may borrow that. Thessara stopped in front of him. You could be imprisoned, she said. Your modifications violate both our laws. Absolutely, Cameron agreed. I checked. Thoroughly. That's why I didn't bring it up during introductions. Her gaze sharpened. You heard everything. Yes. Even my doubts. Cameron hesitated, just a fraction. Yes. The room went still again. Thassara studied him, not as a threat now, but as a complication. Finally, she exhaled slowly, a sound that carried layered meaning Cameron chose not to analyze too closely. You should not exist, she said softly. Neither should this station. Cameron replied. But here we both are, defying expectations. A pause. Then to his surprise, she laughed. It was brief, almost startled, but unmistakable. You are inconvenient, she said. I specialize in that, Cameron said. It's on my resume under other skills. Thassara turned to her advisors. Leave us. There was resistance in the air, but obedience won. When the doors sealed again, the silence was different, less hostile, more curious. You realize, she said, that by standing here, you force questions my people avoid. Humans are good at that, Cameron said. We ask questions until someone invents a committee. She regarded him for a long moment. You heard us speak freely because we believed you incapable of understanding. That illusion is gone. I can stop listening, Cameron offered. I'm very good at pretending not to hear things. It's a marketable skill. She shook her head. No, you cannot become invisible again. Cameron felt that land somewhere deep and uncomfortable. He smiled anyway. I was never very good at invisible, he said, tripped over furniture constantly. Thassara returned to the dais, thoughtful now. You will remain, she said. Not as a prisoner, not as a delegate. As what? Cameron asked. She met his eyes. As proof. Cameron considered that, then sighed. I was hoping for something simpler, he said, like exile. Exile is simple, Thassara replied. Change is not. The hum of the station deepened, steady and patient, as if it had all the time in the universe. Cameron learned quickly that being labeled proof came with a schedule and absolutely no sense of humor. He was relocated to a guest residence that had once hosted minor dignitaries and one disgraced philosopher whose name everyone now pretended not to remember. The walls adjusted color based on emotional tone, which meant they spent most of the first day an anxious shade of amber. Cameron apologized to them out of habit. He was not confined, technically. The doors opened when he approached. The guards outside pretended they were decorative. Every corridor hummed with the Citadel's quiet intelligence. Gravitic fields recalibrating as people moved. Lights shifting with foot traffic. It was beautiful in the way only things that could crush you effortlessly ever were. Thassara did not summon him immediately. That worried him more than if she had. Instead, others came. Scientists first, introduced as cultural consultants, which was a lie so transparent Cameron respected the attempt. They scanned his throat with instruments that tickled and hummed, projecting layered holograms of musculature and resonance chambers. Cameron watched his own voice rendered as shifting geometry and felt the familiar mix of pride and regret. This fold here, one scientist said, ears twitching in fascination, should not sustain harmonic overlap. It complains sometimes, Cameron said, usually when I'm tired or sarcastic. Another looked up. Does sarcasm affect your resonance? Dramatically. They debated around him as if he were furniture with opinions. Cameron supplied jokes where appropriate, mostly to see which ones translated. Some did, some did not. Thessaran humor, he discovered, favored precision and delayed impact. One joke landed 3 minutes after he told it, which he found both impressive and unsettling. Between sessions, he was escorted through public spaces. Word had spread. Thessarans stared openly, ears angled in curiosity or suspicion. Humans stared worse. He caught fragments of whispered commentary in trade pidgin and standard. Augmented, compromised, traitor. Miracle. One human clerk asked him, in awe, if it hurt to speak like that. Only when people expect me to explain it, Cameron replied. The first private conversation with Thassara came late, in a chamber overlooking the station's inner void, where light bent softly around engineered darkness. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, ears relaxed but alert. You are becoming a distraction, she said. I've been told that before, Cameron said, usually at weddings. She glanced at him. You joke to deflect. I joke to survive. She accepted that with a small nod. My advisors are divided. Some want you studied, some want you erased from the record. And you, Cameron asked. I want you understood, she said, which may be the most dangerous option. They spoke at length, not as ruler and subject, but as two anomalies navigating systems built to ignore them. Cameron admitted he had heard her earlier doubts about integration, about the fear that her people would lose something essential by changing. He told her gently that humans said the same things every time they encountered something new, right before adopting it and claiming they invented it. That is not reassuring, Thesera said. It's historically accurate. She asked why he learned the Sarin in secret. Cameron thought about the nights alone, practicing tones until his voice ached, about the strange comfort of understanding conversations not meant for him. Because listening without being seen is the closest I've ever come to peace, he said, and because I didn't want to belong badly enough to ask permission. That earned him a long, unreadable look. When he returned to his residence, the walls had shifted to a thoughtful blue. Cameron lay back and stared at the ceiling, listening to the citadel breathe. He understood now what Thesera meant. He could not unhear what he had heard. He could not unknow what his existence implied. Humor helped, but it did not erase consequence. The next day, negotiations resumed with Cameron seated beside the Queen, visibly, undeniably present. When an advisor slipped into Thesserin out of habit, Cameron translated aloud without comment, his tone neutral, his timing impeccable. The room adjusted. People learned. Some laughed despite themselves. For the first time since the accident that remade him, Cameron felt neither hidden nor exposed, but balanced on a narrow edge between worlds. It was uncomfortable. It was dangerous. It was, he suspected, exactly where history happened. The first official session with Cameron seated beside the Queen felt like a social experiment conducted without consent. The Sarin delegates adjusted their posture, their ears betraying irritation, curiosity, or careful neutrality. Humans fidgeted, suddenly aware that the quiet merchant with arithmetic eyes was now an audible variable. The citadel itself seemed to lean in, gravitic fields subtly rebalancing as if even the station wanted a better view. Cameron kept his hands folded and his expression mild. Internally, he ran a familiar checklist. Breathe, resonate, don't correct pronunciation unless invited, and absolutely do not translate the insults unless they were funny enough to justify it. They were not. Trade language flowed first, safe and sanitized. Then habit crept in. An advisor shifted into Thesserin mid-sentence, voice low, confident in old assumptions. Cameron translated seamlessly, not pausing, not emphasizing. The effect was immediate. The speaker flinched as if caught whispering in a room with excellent acoustics. I apologize, Cameron added mildly. Reflex. Thesera's lips twitched. By the third hour, people began to forget he was extraordinary. That, Cameron decided, was progress. They argued policy, logistics, resource flows across star systems threaded by jump corridors that bent space like tired wire. He contributed when asked, mostly clarifying intent rather than content. Humor slipped in naturally, small and dry, like ballast. When a human envoy complained about the Sarin delay rituals, Cameron translated the complaint faithfully, then added, with respect, in the precise tonal register that meant this will hurt less if you laugh. Some did. Between sessions, Cameron was summoned by a human oversight committee that technically had no authority here, but acted as if paperwork were a universal constant. The holocall flickered to life, faces tight with concern. You didn't disclose the extent of your modifications, the chairperson said. You didn't ask, Cameron replied. You asked if I was fluent. I am. You are biologically compromised. Join the club, Cameron said. Membership is growing. They warned him of consequences. Licenses suspended. Trade routes reconsidered. Quiet exile disguised as administrative error. Cameron listened, nodding politely, the same way he used to listen to the Sarin advisors complain about humans while assuming he was deaf. When the call ended, he felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Thesera found him afterward in a quiet transit corridor where the walls displayed slow-motion stellar nurseries. Your people are afraid, she observed. They're always afraid, Cameron said. It's one of our most reliable exports. They will cast you out. Already started, he said. I think I broke their favorite rule, the one about staying neatly categorized. She considered that. You are doing the same to mine. That's fair. The resistance grew less polite after that. Traditionalist delegates challenged Cameron's presence openly, calling him an aberration, a contamination vector wrapped in charm. Cameron responded with patience, and the occasional joke about being washable. Thesara shut down calls for his removal with calm authority, but Cameron could see the cost accumulating, like stress fractures in a hull. Science teams requested deeper access. Cameron negotiated limits. He refused invasive scans, citing personal dignity and an aversion to being disassembled while conscious. The Tsar-in-law, surprisingly, sided with him. Someone muttered about inconvenient precedents. One evening, alone in his residence, Cameron practiced the Tsarin tonal poetry softly, letting the walls drift into a calmer hue. He thought about the merchant life he'd lost without quite realizing it, about the freedom of being ignored. He missed it less than he expected. The next session brought a turning point. A minor trade clause hinged on a culturally loaded phrase that no one could quite align across languages. Cameron listened, waited, then offered an alternative phrasing that preserved intent while shifting the emotional weight. It landed perfectly. The room stilled, then relaxed. The Tsar inclined her head to him. Respect, this time unguarded. Afterwards, she said quietly, "You are no longer just proof." Cameron smiled faintly. "That's a relief. Proof gets boring. You are a bridge. Those get walked on." "Yes," she agreed, "but they also change where people can go." Cameron looked out at the stars beyond the citadel's curve, at routes once impossible, now mundane. Humor bubbled up, softer than before. "Well," he said, "at least I won't be invisible when they name the committee." Thesara laughed openly this time, and for a moment the weight of history felt just a little more manageable. By the fifth rotation cycle, Cameron stopped pretending that things might return to normal. Normal had quietly packed its bags, rerouted its jump coordinates, and left a polite note saying this was for the best. The Citadel adapted faster than its inhabitants. New security protocols accounted for mixed species vocal authentication. Acoustic sensors were recalibrated to stop flagging Cameron's voice as an anomaly and start treating it as an uncomfortable but legitimate data point. The station's intelligence, pragmatic and unsentimental, decided that if a human could speak the Tsarin, it was cheaper to accept that fact than to keep triggering alerts. People were slower. Cameron's presence had become symbolic, and symbols, he was learning, were rarely invited to lunch without ulterior motives. The Tsarin conservatives avoided him entirely, which was a relief. Humans, on the other hand, began seeking him out with a desperate intensity usually reserved for malfunctioning machines or religious icons. One human delegate cornered him near a grav lift. "So if we wanted to, theoretically, modify others—" "No," Cameron said gently. "You absolutely do not want to start that sentence. But you're proof—" "I'm proof of bad decisions compounding over time," Cameron said. "Not a user manual." The delegate frowned. "You don't seem grateful." "I lost my career, my medical privacy, and the ability to clear my throat without alarming a room," Cameron said. "I'm working through it." Humor still helped, but it was sharper now, honed against pressure. Thesra noticed. She summoned him more frequently, not always for formal reasons. Sometimes they spoke while walking the Citadel's outer gallery, where transparent alloy panels revealed the curve of space and the slow drift of docked vessels. "You are becoming a rallying point," she said one evening. "I was hoping for minor footnote," Cameron replied. "That was never an option." He sighed. Figures. Resistance coalesced into structure. A formal motion was raised questioning the validity of any agreement negotiated with Cameron present. The argument was elegantly phrased and deeply insulting. Cameron translated it faithfully, then leaned toward the Sarah and murmured, "For the record, that last metaphor implies I'm a contagious fungus." She didn't smile. That worried him more than if she had. The motion triggered debates across the station, broadcasts spilling into public forums where Thessarans argued identity and humans argued advantage. And Cameron's name was pronounced in a dozen tonal variations he had never intended to inspire. He avoided the feeds. He focused on what he could control: language, timing, precision. Science teams escalated their requests. Non-invasive studies turned into proposals that involved sedation and long consent forms. Cameron declined politely until politeness wore thin. "I am not a sample," he said during one heated exchange. "I am an outcome." "Outcomes are studied," a researcher replied. So our mistake, Cameron said. Pick your framing carefully. Thesara backed him, invoking ancient laws about bodily autonomy that predated her throne, that earned her quiet fury from old houses and something like admiration from younger ones. Cameron saw the lines tightening around her eyes. You don't have to do this, he told her once. She looked at him, ears angled forward. Neither did you. That shut him up. The vote was scheduled. Cameron felt it like an approaching weather system. If the motion passed, agreements would collapse, and his presence would be reclassified from inconvenient to illegal. Exile would follow if he was lucky. The night before, Cameron stood alone in a resonance chamber designed for Thessaran vocal training. The space responded to sound, walls shifting subtly as tones layered. He spoke softly, then louder, letting his voice fill the geometry. He practiced not the language of contracts but of ceremony, phrases rarely spoken now, heavy with cultural weight. He didn't know if it would matter. He knew only that he could not stay silent. The chamber doors opened. Thesara entered without announcement. You plan to speak tomorrow, she said. Yes. They will object. Frequently. They will say you manipulate us. I manipulate air, Cameron said. Meaning is optional. She studied him. You are afraid. Of course, he said. I'm human. She surprised him by placing a hand on the chamber wall, feeling the vibration fade. So am I, she said quietly, then corrected herself with a soft exhale. In the ways that matter. The vote began under full broadcast. Cameron sat, listened, translated nothing. When the motion reached its crescendo, Thesara gestured. Speak, she said. Cameron stood. He spoke in Thessaran, not quickly, not defensively. He acknowledged fear without dismissing it. He admitted the danger of change and joked gently about how every advancement once looked like sacrilege. He intentionally mispronounced a ceremonial suffix, then corrected himself with an apologetic grin that rippled unexpected laughter through the chamber. That laugh broke something. The tension shifted, redistributed. People listened. He finished simply. I am not asking you to change, he said. I am asking you to accept that change already happened. Silence followed, then discussion, then delay. Cameron sat down, heart pounding, throat aching, humor finally exhausted. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing with clarity sharp enough to hurt. There was no invisible path back. The delay after Cameron's speech stretched into something ceremonial, as if time itself were waiting for permission to continue. Thessaran councils were very good at delaying without appearing indecisive. They called it contemplation, which sounded far more dignified than everyone quietly panicking. Cameron remained seated beside Thesara, hands folded, expression neutral, heart doing acrobatics that would have impressed a zero-gravity athlete. The chamber's acoustics shifted as delegates murmured in layered tones, harmonics overlapping like weather systems colliding. Cameron understood every word and pretended, heroically, to understand none of the implications. Humor retreated to the back of his mind, sharpening knives for later use. Thesara leaned slightly toward him. You altered the suffix intentionally. Yes, Cameron whispered. I needed them to laugh before they remembered why they were angry. That was manipulative. Educational, he corrected. Laughter opens the throat. It's a physiological fact. She did not reply, but her ear flicked in what he had learned meant reluctant agreement. The council fractured into factions. Some argued that Cameron's existence invalidated centuries of biological doctrine. Others argued that doctrine had invalidated itself by being wrong. A smaller, louder group insisted that accepting Cameron meant inviting uncontrolled hybridization, the end of Thessaran purity, and, somehow, economic collapse. Cameron made a mental note to never underestimate the versatility of fear. When the vote was finally called, it did not resolve anything. The motion to nullify the agreements failed by a narrow margin, but a secondary resolution passed, a comprehensive inquiry into Cameron's status, his legality, and his future involvement. It was, Thesara explained later, the political equivalent of saying we are not ready to kill this idea yet. Cameron laughed when she told him that. It came out strained, but real. I'll take not yet executed as a win, he said. The aftermath was quieter but more dangerous. Thessaran security protocols tightened around him, not to confine but to protect, which felt uncomfortably similar in practice. Human authorities issued formal notices revoking his trade credentials, citing unresolved biological irregularities. Cameron read the message twice, then once more for the humor value. "Well," he muttered, "that's going to hurt my customer loyalty." He was summoned again, this time by a joint scientific council operating under Thessaran oversight. The room was colder, deliberately neutral, its walls projecting static star maps instead of comforting colors. Cameron recognized the tactic: remove warmth, remove distraction, reduce the subject to data. "We require a definitive assessment," the lead researcher said. "Your vocal system represents a convergence of species traits previously believed incompatible." Cameron nodded. "That's been the theme of my week. You could authorize deeper scans." "No." "You could consent to replication studies." "Absolutely not." "You could," the researcher pressed, "be instrumental in accelerating integration." Cameron leaned forward. "I am not a shortcut," he said evenly. "I am a consequence. If you want integration, do the slow work. Argue, adapt, make mistakes that don't involve cutting people open." There was tension, sharp and clean. Then unexpectedly, a junior researcher spoke. "He's right," she said, ears angled uncertainly. "If this were easy, it wouldn't matter." Cameron smiled at her. "Welcome to my entire philosophy." That night, Thessara invited him to a restricted observation ring near the Citadel's core, where artificial gravity dropped to a gentle suggestion and the stars curved around engineered singularities. They floated, anchored by subtle field tethers, the universe bending politely around them. "You are no longer merely evidence," Thessara said. "You are precedent." "Those usually get appealed," Cameron replied. "They also endure." He considered that. "You know I can't go back." "Yes. And I don't fully belong here." "No." Cameron exhaled. "That's a remarkably small list of options." Thessara watched the stars rotate. "History is built by those with no comfortable place to stand." He laughed softly. "Figures. I finally find my voice and lose my footing." She turned to him, expression open in a way he had never seen before. "You changed nothing by speaking," she said. "You revealed what was already changing." Cameron felt the weight of that settle, heavy but steady. The Citadel hummed, ancient and patient, as if amused by how long it took its inhabitants to catch up. For the first time since the accident, since the surgeries and the secrecy and the quiet listening, Cameron felt something close to clarity. He was not a mistake. He was a direction. The Citadel felt different once the decision was made. Not louder, not quieter, just settled, like a massive machine that had finished recalibrating and was content with its new tolerances. Cameron noticed it first in the way doors opened a fraction sooner when he approached, how the station no longer hesitated before recognizing his voice as authorized rather than anomalous. Even the hum beneath his feet seemed steadier, less curious about him. The inquiry concluded without drama, which in Thessaran politics was considered a triumph. Cameron was classified as a legal singularity, not a model, not a violation, not a threat, a category of one. The conservatives hated it because it solved nothing permanently. The reformists loved it for the same reason. Thessara signed the final decree with a stylus grown from living alloy, then handed it to Cameron to read aloud, in Thessaran, for the record. He did carefully, resisting the urge to add commentary. When he finished, he cleared his throat. "For clarity," he said, "this means I'm allowed to exist." A ripple of restrained laughter moved through the chamber. Thessara allowed herself a smile. Human space responded exactly as Cameron expected. His exile was formalized with impeccable politeness. He was thanked for his service, wished well in his future endeavors, and quietly removed from every registry that implied he belonged anywhere familiar. Cameron forwarded the messages to a private archive labeled "Sentimental Artifacts" and did not open them again. Instead, he accepted the position Thessara offered. Liaison without portfolio, translator without replacement, a role invented precisely because no one knew what to call him. He moved into quarters closer to the heart of the Citadel, smaller but warmer, the walls responsive now to his mood rather than alarmed by it. They favored soft greens and blues. Cameron decided that meant he was improving. Work settled into rhythm. Negotiations progressed faster, cleaner, no longer haunted by mistranslation or the false comfort of secrecy. The Sarans stopped assuming humans were deaf to nuance. Humans stopped assuming aliens were inscrutable. Cameron stood between them, not as a bridge he'd once feared being trampled, but as shared ground where both sides had to behave. Humor returned fully once the stakes stopped escalating. Cameron corrected mispronunciations with exaggerated solemnity. The Saran aides competed to see who could make him laugh in his own language. Someone started a betting pool on how long it would take before a new committee was formed to study the committee studying him. Cameron won that one by guessing before lunch. One evening, standing again in the observation ring, the Sarah joined him without ceremony. The stars curved around them, ancient light bent by patient engineering. "You are quieter lately," she observed. "I'm listening differently," Cameron said. "It turns out being heard is exhausting." She nodded. "You have changed." "So have you," he replied. "You're less careful." Careful was never the same as right. They stood in companionable silence. Cameron thought about the man he'd been when he arrived, content to observe, to calculate, to remain unnoticed. He thought about the voice he once hid, afraid of what it would cost him. The cost had been real, so had the return. "I used to think my voice was a mistake," he said. "Something done to me. And now it's just me." The Sarah's ears angled in what he'd learned meant approval. "Then our work was worth it." Cameron smiled, feeling the station hum around him, feeling for the first time not balanced on an edge, but standing somewhere solid that hadn't existed before he helped name it. Somewhere in the Citadel, a translator was being trained in a language humans supposedly could not speak. Somewhere else, a human doctor was quietly rereading old xenobiology papers with new interest. Change, slow and inconvenient, had begun doing what it always did best. Cameron took a breath, resonant and unafraid, and spoke, not to prove anything, not to shock, but simply because he could. And the universe,